And as Russia's war in Ukraine entered its third month, details of atrocities continue to mount. Journalists covering the conflict are taking a more cautious approach. According to media groups, including the International Press Institute, several journalists, foreign and Ukrainian, have been killed since February 24. Dozens more have been wounded, either by incoming fire or being shot at while on assignment. The National Union of Journalists in Ukraine reports as many as 20 reporters could have been killed, a figure that includes those victims where the circumstances of deaths have not been determined. Joining us now to talk more is Emma Bergmans, Free Press Unlimited FPU Program Coordinator, Safety and Emergency Response. She joins us now from Amsterdam. Emma, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
I know that Free Press Unlimited has been supporting journalists around the world, covering different areas. What's it been like supporting journalists in Ukraine?
Journalists in Ukraine have been targeted and continue to face unprecedented dangers for carrying out their work. In addition to the dangers that they of course face while covering war and conflict, we also see that journalists in Ukraine have been specifically targeted. They have been kidnapped, they have been killed, they have been attacked, and sometimes they're refused safe passage from cities under siege. Due to the rapid evolvement of the situation in Ukraine, it has been extremely important for us to provide a very rapid response. And thanks to the flexible mandate of our emergency program Reporters Respond and our connection and collaboration with newsrooms, media outlets, journalist associations and international organizations, we have been able to support over 400 journalists in Ukraine thus far.
In such difficult situations, conflict, what are the kinds of things or support that journalists need the most?
One of the main needs that we see at the moment is really a need for support to relocate, either internally within the country to a safer area, but also sometimes externally. If the journalist really faces direct threats, they may need to relocate outside of the country to a neighboring country, for example. And in addition, in order for the journalists to continue to report on the conflict and be more safe, there's also a huge need for personal protective equipment, such as bulletproof vests and helmets. And of course, medical trauma kits in case something happens, so they can do first aid. In addition to the physical aspect, we also see a huge need for digital security support. For example, VPNs, so they can continue their work without surveillance. And what we also should not forget is, of course, a huge impact that covering conflict has on the mental health of journalists. So we've been really focusing on providing psychological assistance to journalists, as well as setting up support networks between journalists so they can support each other.
And honestly, talking about their kits, bulletproof vests and helmets, that hasn't really helped, seeing, the killing of our colleague Shireen Abu Akleh over at the West Bank. But then looking at, this war, this invasion, in terms of the nature of reporting, do you think that has changed for journalists who are covering difficult situations, or should it change?
Well, unfortunately, I think what we see is that the safety of journalists globally is deteriorating at an alarming rate. With anti-media rhetoric on the rise, so too is violence and harassment against journalists. And we see that journalists are not only facing dangers in conflict zones, war areas or crisis situations, but also that globally on a wide scale, the media freedom and safety of journalists situation is really deteriorating. This is because of the rise of global rise of authoritarian governments, political polarization, the dissemination of fake news. We see that the threats against journalists are evolving more and more. It's not just physical. There's also a lot of digital threats against journalists, online harassment, especially women journalists, and also legal threats, trying to detain journalists under certain new legislations, emergency laws, or even under the guise of COVID-19.
So what do you see happening? What should be happening to protect journalists?
I believe that in recent years there has been increasing attention towards the safety of journalists. Of course, in 2012, the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists was adopted, and there have been 9 resolutions by different UN fora. And these global standards, they have led to a good framework for regional and national mechanisms. There's also been the development of the Media Freedom Coalition in July of 2019, which is a partnership of different countries who advocate for media freedom and the safety of journalists. So we have definitely seen positive developments. But unfortunately, in many parts of the world, these support mechanisms are not enough, and we see that the safety of journalists continues to be threatened. So there's not enough to protect journalists, to prevent legal threats, and to combat impunity.
Well, this is an issue we will keep, putting our spotlight on, indeed, so that, the right things can be done. We appreciate your time. Emma Bergmans with Free Press Unlimited is the Program Coordinator, Safety and Emergency Response. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.